Okay, thank you, everybody. Andy, Bill. You're welcome here. Okay, so let's go straight into it. Lord help us to have a subject like this. It's quite challenging, isn't it? So we need grace, so please give it to us. Amen. What we're going to do in 3 parts. So each time one of us will say a little bit, and then we've got a question or two to throw out. The usual kind of thoughts, nothing wrong like that. Just because this subject needs to be reflected on the background and people's stories are important, because we don't have a lot of time anyway, but let's hope that this just kicks off a few things. So let me just say a few things first about what are we talking about here, these 3 Ds, and the question on the back of that short. And then Phil will do something on, so unpack that a little bit and think about some of the background in the country as well. So the first bit is especially your own observations and people you know even. The second bit is about, let's pan out and see what's going on. The third thing is obviously, okay, so what kind of thing? So that's the kind of direction. So let me kick off a few little notes here. Those 3 Ds that I respond to them, but in a way, they're not separate. It's kind of like there's a journey going on here. Somebody might be disappointed they end up possibly done, meaning I'm done with church as it is, I'm put off. And we would like to say in the spirit of what this game is about, of course, it's primarily a relationship. We're not talking doctrine in the first place. We are talking about relationships and trust that gets broken or whatever. So it's a relational thing, which gives us a hint about the final part. If it's a relational issue primarily, that's what I'm suggesting, then maybe some ways forward will also be relational before anything else. Just very quickly on those 3 things. The disappointed, and we batted this around a lot, especially with the second D. There's a lot of words that start with D. Have you noticed that? Thank you, depression and all those kind of things. Well, we picked on a few. See what you think. And so we're not being overly definitive. We're trying to kind of paint a picture here, it seems to me. And if we kick off with the disappointed, that's kind of the first stage, if you want to put it that way. And the challenge there is the challenge of listening to people who are feeling disappointed with church as we know it. So some of the voices in that might say, I care, I'm still invested, but something somehow hasn't matched what I hoped for, what I signed up for. I'm disappointed, or I trusted you and you let me down. Or will you just listen when your practices fall short of your promises? So there's a kind of thoughts that are going around, and in a sense it provokes a kind of protest that says, will you just listen to me? And so it's a challenge of listening. Move on a little bit, perhaps, you get to disillusioned. And the challenge there is not just of listening, it's a challenging of integrity. I'm not sure that I can stay with this. So the voices might say, I see now what I didn't see before and what I can't unsee about how things operate. Something I trusted or assumed no longer holds in the same way. And will you change now what is actually broken? I'm seeing things now. And the challenge of integrity, and because there's insights emerging now, I'm not just feeling a bit disappointed. There's something underlying here. Do you see what I'm saying? And ultimately, if people then do go all the way, the done is pretty obvious what that means. I'm done with this and I'm off. So the challenge there is those others, but it's also the challenge of legitimacy. Is this even a valid way of operating this church as we've known it? I've stopped hoping you're changed. Staying costs more than leaving. How come you get to decide how things are run? So the result is detachment. You get the kind of picture. That's the way we see it, where you will have your own perspective. Here's a kind of summary thing. Again, relational. People don't leave usually See what you think. People don't leave necessarily because of doctrinal disagreements, but they do leave when relational, cultural, and experiential breakdowns occur. And so therefore the relational approach is not just advisable, it actually is the only way, because trust is broken down or whatever. So interestingly, we bat this around. We don't do exit interviews mostly in church, do we? So somebody, well, they just disappear usually. They're just, 3 months later, I didn't see blogs. What happened? I have no idea. And so people talk about the front door being open, but the back door is open as well. And we're not great at that, picking up why it is that people are disappointed, disillusioned, and then finally done. But it would be instructive, wouldn't it? If, I don't know if churches ever do this, go and talk to the people who are leaving or left. Why did you do that? So that's something for us to reflect about. So, okay. I'm deliberately keeping that short because we want to get to the meat of it. Anybody want to say anything immediately? Because I'll lob a question out.
Maybe on the disillusion, the way I've sort of heard it is maybe it's, we've made it ourselves, but maybe it's different between rhetoric and reality, or saying and doing. You're saying one thing, but you're doing another. Therefore, it's become a problem of integrity. Or, so that's, if it helps you. If it doesn't, forget about it. But
Kind of contradiction.
So is the focus mostly going to be on those 3Ds in relationship to church communities, or just generally in life, with vision, with expectations on how they thought their life was going to be? Is it more general, or is it
primarily to do with church as we know it kind of thing? Because that's usually the context, but obviously it has much wider things. But we've only got a few minutes to think about it. Yeah. Okay, well, let's do a personal reflection for a minute, just on your own, and then Phil will come in. Just have a little think about your own experience with respect to those things and those journeys, and maybe quite likely people you've known. Are you still in contact with them? That would be a good question, wouldn't it? But just for a moment, you might want to scribble some thoughts down. Just take a minute or two just to reflect on your own about your experience of these things, and then we'll come back again.
I'm done.
He's off.
Yeah, he's gone.
Which is unfortunate, really, because he was going to do the next. Okay, so have a little think about that. So in a minute, or after Phil's said a few things, we'll obviously give the opportunity just in twos and threes, whatever, to share that. So you take it away.
Yeah, great. So my job is to just paint a bigger picture a little bit on the 3Ds. It turns out so there's plenty of research on church attendance and affiliation, and there's also a growing body of information on trust and safeguarding, but there's still a shortage of large, high respondent, UK-wide, charismatic, specific, should we say, research on the 3Ds. So we don't have much empirical research on our specific question, really. But that said, I've done a bit of Googling, and I've found that over recent decades, there have been, as we know, a series of cultural and political shocks that have deepened already postmodern suspicion of authority and big picture meta-narratives, official narratives, should we say, and have thereby catalysed this rise of the disappointed, the disillusioned, and the dumb, the 3Ds. Let's get some backdrop, there's a cultural background there. In fact, why don't we just list some of those within living memory? So we have, let's go back 25 years now. We have the trauma of 9/11, 2001. Then we have the controversial wars that followed, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq war, the war on terror, ISIS, and then the wars in Iraq and Syria again. So wars and wars and wars and wars, some of which were maybe dubiously justified in the eyes of public opinion. Then you've got the global banking crisis and its aftermath, 2008. We've got Brexit and the prolonged political dysfunction that ensued. So that was from, should we say, 2016 to roughly 2020. Then we have years of austerity that shifted the costs onto the most vulnerable. And that was almost continuously from 2010 to 2024. And all of that, and other factors could be named, eroded trust in national and international institutions that were meant to actually protect the common good. They didn't do a good job, and people have started to mistrust in a big way. Further, we could mention that there have been notorious church and leadership scandals. I'm sure you can think of a whole number yourself, that have undermined church leaders' moral authority and eroded, again, trust in the institutions these people represented. And then you have the rise of polarizing figures like Donald Trump that have normalized performative outrage and contempt for truth and standards in what's increasingly becoming a post-factual, anti-establishmentarian environment. Then we've got the COVID factor, COVID-19, and that intensified the dynamics, didn't it? Because you had a combination of emergency state powers, contested expertise, we don't believe the scientists anymore, and social fragmentation, literally, because we were in our bubbles. And then you have the democratization of knowledge through the internet and AI, and this has increasingly eroded the status of experts and specialists, which has also affected the standing of, let's face it, theologians and pastors. Thank you very much, Mr. Pastor. Often Mr. Pastor. Less so Miss Pastor, Mrs. Pastor. Thank you, yeah. So thank you very much for your insights, but actually, there's far better material on the internet anyway, so I don't need you. And it's eroded the trust of pastors and theologians. Then you've got an almost all-embracing observation. There's been a steady decline in the power of Christendom in the post-war years, which has resulted in decreased religious affiliation and church attendance. And in a UK census, we see what is your religion, it was called. The proportion identifying as Christians fell sharply from 59% in 2011 to 46% in 2021. Well, that's 13%. While those reporting no religion rose from 25% to 37%, 12% increase. So this change is widely understood not simply as population replacement, i.e. older people die, but as religious switching, with many people who were raised in a Christian context later disaffiliating. That seems to be the inference. So the interpretation is then reinforced by Pew Research Centre findings, which show that around 29% of people born Christian have since left religion, making it reasonable to assume that much of the UK's growing no religion category consists of former Christians. So it paints the same picture. Former Christians losing faith. Fourthly, there was, of course, the much publicised survey commissioned by the Bible Society. You would have heard of it, no doubt. It was conducted by YouGov, and it made quite famous now the quiet revolution that's happening, particularly apparently amongst males in Generation Z. All sorts of questions that need to be asked about and have been asked about methodology, sampling size, how reliable is that data? But then again, I was talking to somebody over lunch, Dennis, South Bank, who confirms his church has grown by a third just over the last few months because people in their 20s are having dreams of Jesus and are rocking up and saying, Jesus sent me to church. All right. Yes. Last but not least, you could say that the information that does exist on the 3Ds is largely case-specific. Think Anglican safeguarding, controversies, think Mike Pilavachi, Soul Survivor, and all of that. How then to summarise all of that? Well, maybe that in addressing the challenges of the 3Ds, we largely have to fall back on books like Rewilding, a book by Steve Aisthorpe that I read, published in 2018, and then you've got the anecdotal evidence, the personal evidence, our stories. And speaking personally, I found the term churchianity quite useful, because for me it encapsulates what seems to have gone wrong in much of our church culture. So broadly speaking, the criticism is that church life has just become far too Sunday-centric. Pastors have started to overfunction. They've become managers who are preoccupied with metrics and with technique. And the churchgoers have embraced their role as hyper-individualistic consumers. Take it or leave it kind of thing. If it's doing it for me, I'll come. If it's not doing it for me, I'm leaving. And then our relationship with God and each other has become too transactional, and it's left us feeling quite empty and frustrated. And what is more, and I come into land, what is more, as Andy and I have thought about our own wider family, we've discovered that there's pretty much divide right down the middle between those who are still going to church and those who aren't anymore, or experimenting with alternatives. So even in our own wider family, we're seeing this pan out. So this question of the 3Ds does come close to home. And I would even go so far as to say that in the absence of empirical studies, and just those hints that we have about cultural trends and so on, and a few surveys here and there, in the end, it's our lived experience that's as good a starting point as any, really, when we're looking at the question of the disappointed, disillusioned, and the done. And so against that wider canvas, let's go straight into our second exercise now. If you could just turn to 2 or 3 people next. There you are, actually. I was just quoting you. So going into groups of 2s and 3s, why don't we tell each other what those reflections were that you had on your own a moment ago. So just spend a few minutes talking to each other about that.
Just talk to me, people. How is that? Let's have some gleanings. Short gleanings. Yeah, exactly. That's a very key one, isn't it? Okay, well, let me just shunt us on a little bit further, because I'm not quite sure what time we're supposed to finish. I'm trying to avoid looking at the programme, really. So we'll go on as long as we can. So we're just kind of defining a bit, giving a bit of background. We're giving a few, albeit anecdotal, but very personal reflections. So let's think about, okay, so what kind of thing? What might happen? Remember I said at the beginning, people don't leave by and large. I mean, you gave an exception. Somebody said, one of you guys said about the doctrinal stuff they did, but I think in most cases, it's probably less of that and more of it's just not working for me, and they said something wrong and I don't trust them, and da. So if there are relational reasons for being disappointed and even going, then perhaps there need to be relational responses to it. So let me just throw out a few things. And then I've got a couple of questions on the back of that. Why did people disengage? Well, there are various reasons. Let me throw a few out. What you might call conditional belonging, the idea or the experience that it's okay while you agree with what's going on, or maybe you're serving on the rota and whatever, but if you're beginning to have a few doubts about it, you begin to disengage, but somehow it then falls apart, and you're not you don't really feel your belonging feels fragile. So that's one thing. Related to that is perhaps what you might call instrumental relationships, that while you are on the rota, you're doing stuff, and there's nothing wrong with doing that the friendships inevitably develop. But if you do a step back from that for whatever reason, then you're not fitting into it anymore, and things can then slip away. I was useful more than I was known, might be the response. And then moral more than pastoral engagement, kind of, this is the correct way to do it. Some churches more strict than others. This is what we expect. Sometimes unspokenly. Oh, I see, you're not doing that. It's kind of, there's these funny dynamics. So there's probably other reasons. But and when, how are we doing? 10 minutes, okay. And now we know. And if then sometimes, it's not every case, but sometimes when somebody has started floating off and then somebody from the pastoral team goes and visit them, if they do, sometimes it can be a little bit asymmetrical. And now I'm coming to you because you're a lost sheep and I need to bring you back into our fold, kind of thing. It's a slight caricature, but you know what I'm saying. Leave it at that at the moment. Here's some thoughts on a relational approach, what that might mean. Somehow, I remember I was a church leader for many years, and I think sometimes the mindset in the church leader, that's me, might be, oh, well, so we've got a difficult person there and a person who's kind of got real problems over there, and they look as if they're going. So almost become a difficult person, a bit of a project to have to go and deal with. And somehow we lose sight of the person I still value, even though it's not easy. I should say at this point, this is a two-way street. It's not always because this hierarchy and the leaders are getting it all wrong. These poor victims are being abused by this nasty system. There's something of that sometimes. But there's also people bring their baggage, don't they? And some people can be very disruptive. And everybody brings their emotional issues. And so you can end up with a whole scene, if you're not careful, that is very messy. Sometimes we, as well as seeing people a project, as well as instead of a person, we can have our answers ready even before we're listening to them. So it seems to me that listening is such a key dimension. If we're talking about relational responses, it has to do that. There's a challenge there for us, of course, if we're... Yes, one thing I wanted to say was this. Because we don't do our exit interviews and we're not keeping tabs on who's left and who hasn't, or we know who hasn't, but who's left, it means that we aren't necessarily, if we're still churchgoers, which is probably most of us in this room, we're still in, we're not necessarily in touch with, unless we've got personal relationships with those people, the large number of people who have floated off. And it is a large number of people. We're talking about people who we've known, that you've known and I've known in our churches, who just aren't anywhere as far as the church is concerned. And sometimes their faith. So it's actually a very large, multiply that by, you get millions of people actually in this country. And but it's hard to know where they are, because by definition they float off. So the people we are aware of, the people still at church, see what I'm saying? And so this is, we may not even be aware of the dimensions of it because they've all gone off there. And so actually that puts a premium on relationship, doesn't it? Because if they floated off and we don't know and we're not in touch, then what can we do? But I think the example you give of this guy is illustrative, isn't it? Of finding ways to engage. Now, that's just on the personal level. The things that Phil was touching on just now are structural and national and big picture things. So we need a completely different workshop or a related workshop that looks at the bigger issues because they are influential in the personal. And part of the reason, much of the reason why people float off, and the kind of hints you were saying about people's expectations they bring culturally and the rest of it, that inevitably hasn't it? So as we're talking about, it seemed there are these two dimensions. There's the personal, where all of us have some kind of connection with that. But then there's, if you like, the systemic and the structural, which is huge. It's of vast importance. Let me give you a few examples of that. The clergy-laity divide, whether it's the vicar or the pastor on the one hand and the rest of the congregation, or whether it's charismatic churches that have teams, ministry teams, they do most of the work. I probably don't need to expand on the issues there, but that's probably one of the most important ones, is that these are the people doing the ministry. It's in my view, contradistinction against Ephesians 4:11 and 12, equipping the church, the sort of things we've been talking about today. That is the chief function, it seems to me, of leaders, to release people to do it. But actually they're doing it and having breakdowns and burnouts as a result. So that's huge, isn't it? Yeah, there you go. Congregational base, the Sunday meeting, the denomination, there's loads of issues there. I'm just aware that those are huge things that we need to also think about. I hope I haven't thrown too much at you here. So let me ask this question as we go into the final bit to think about. Keep in mind the stories you just reflected on, but then expanded a bit more. Number one, think of those people who have floated off. Think of your own experience, etc. What might be a helpful relational response to that, to meet the challenge of whatever? How might you or I, or the people you're connected with, how might we, I've just given a few hints, How might we maintain the relationship in order not simply to drag them back to Sunday morning, but to see the way forward? And if you've got some time, then to think a bit more broadly on some of those bigger picture things. Is that okay? We're not giving you much to think about here, are we? Start with the one and move on to the other. Let's go back into those groups. Okay, well, let's just take a moment. Lots of thoughts buzzing around our minds, and no doubt people as well. So maybe call to mind some people, faces, names, people you know, and just lift them to the Lord. Lord, have mercy on us all, and particularly those in our hearts. We ask you to help us to be agents of hope and of reconciliation, and to be part of your way forward in this nation in the days ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.